The Breen are back all the way from Deep Space Nine. Woohoo!
And thank goodness for second chances.
Woo. Those topics and more on this week's Biotrekkie with the Admiral, starting now. Welcome back to Biotrekkie with the Admiral. My name is Mohamed Noor. I'm a biology professor at Duke University. I am an occasional science consultant for the Star Trek universe.
And I'm Jayne Brook. I played Admiral Katrina Cornwell on the first two seasons of Star Trek Discovery. And I'm here with my great friend, Mohamed Noor, to talk all things biology and Star Trek Discovery and a few things extra. So we always start with tossing it to Mohamed and having him tell us about three things that stood out to him this week in episodes 5 and 6 of Star Trek Discovery. So Mohamed, take it away.
Yeah, loving season 5 so far. So the things I picked were first talking about the different forms or different appearances we saw of the Breen going back to Deep Space Nine. It's so exciting to learn more about them. And that was from episode 5. Episode 6, I wanted to talk just briefly about two things related to sound. One is about long distance communication. You might remember the little whistle sounds. And the other was using sound vibrations to fix health issues. So that's what I wanted to dive into.
Very cool. That's cool. So, okay, first the Breen.
Let's talk about the Breen. Whew. Okay, well, so more generally, like we do have a lot of species here on Earth that have different sorts of appearances. So with the Breen, we saw there was this sort of blue jelly or greenish jelly sort of appearance sometimes, and we also saw lox, just sort of stable face plastic sort of appearance. And there's a lot of species on Earth, especially if you think about bird species. There are a lot of, especially males of bird species, that have different plumage at different times of year, right? So what'll happen is they'll molt, twice a year and change their appearance. And the reason they do this is that during one time of the year, as you probably would guess, they're trying to attract mates, and that's their focus there. So they have like bright, bold colors, things like that. Other times of the year, they're actually trying to hide. They're trying to hide from predators. So these seasonal plumage changes are pretty common. You see them in especially the small ground foraging birds. Some of them can be really dramatic. So there's one I looked up called the red photy. It molts its brown head and body feathers to become intense red with black eye stripes. Some are a lot more subtle, like you may be familiar with male swamp sparrows. They molt just a little bit of their crown and their face colors just get a little bit less striking, but it's just pretty subtle. But it's interesting in this context of there's this balance of pressure between trying to secure mates, and that's obviously just in the breeding seasons, versus hiding from predators, which is anytime they're not actually mating.
They're basically hiding so that they get a chance to mate.
Yeah, well, that's a great point. That's a great point. Because obviously, if they never breed, then the genes associated with those color variants just go away.
Yeah.
Now it's common, but it's not super common because what ends up happening is you need the right sort of pressures, but you also need reliable environmental cues for like knowing when to change. It's not like they just see a female and then snap their fingers, now they're bold red. It's associated with certain like outside cues. And it also takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of resources to actually molt. So it might be, associated with like hormonal changes, things like that. And there are, so I'm focusing on that one aspect to it, but there are other birds that just sort of molt multiple times a year for different reasons, maybe just to get rid of parasites on their feathers or because they're in an environment where their feathers just get really worn down. But just this idea that you don't always look the same is pretty common, especially when you think about a lot of bird species. Now, I want to dive into some.
I have a question.
No, please, please. Actually, I was
about
going to dive into
birds.
something related, so this is actually a good time to ask a question.
No, I mean, before you move on to the
Yeah,
next thing,
please.
because I guess I have two questions.
Hit it.
Or one comment and one question. One comment is that everyone always finds it is fascinating how the male of the species and the animal world is the one that's all like colorful and,
Right.
dressing himself up.
Yep.
In humans, it's more the female of the species who does that. I mean, people make comments like that. But the two questions. Are there any male bird species that don't change their appearance at all in order to attract a mate? Or do they all?
There are some I'm not sure about like I don't know if I can name a bird species off the top of my head like that, but there are some species which don't change at all, and you see very little. They call it dimorphism, the sort of difference in appearance between males and females. There's a lot of species where there's very little difference in appearance. It's interesting. So what I think you're getting at is the question of like, why do we see so much of this on males in particular across a lot of the animal kingdom?
Yeah, because they, I mean, the peacock and all
Yeah.
that, with all the feathers
Yeah.
and yeah.
The reason for that is there tends to be, on average, more variance in reproductive success for males than in females. So, for example, let's say like let's use a typical man. It's good not to think about humans too much with it. It gets very disturbing. But
Oh, right. Yeah.
think about just like a typical sort of mammal species that very often females will be inseminated and then they'll be pregnant, they'll eventually give birth, and then maybe they get inseminated again and they get pregnant and they give birth. But
They're out of commission for however
they're
long.
on commission for this period of time when they're pregnant, and possibly even for some of the mammals when they're nursing as well. That may stop their reproductive. Males, I mean, in theory, they could sire offspring every night all year. In theory.
Right.
But the variance in reproductive success is very large. And you see this in like some animals like elephant seals, for example. You'll have like there's one elephant seal who's kind of the head, and he's essentially like fertilizing
There's a bunch of females. Yeah.
fertilizing lots and lots of females, but there's a whole bunch of them that are fertilizing none, or a bunch of males are fertilizing no one. So
Oh,
there's high variance in mating success, and often when you see this high variance in mating success, you tend to see high like dimorphism, where like the male, and that's so the elephant seal I was mentioning, they're gigantic. The male elephant seals are gigantic, much bigger than the females. And again, a lot of them are doing nothing, and then there's a couple who are doing like a ton.
no, because they're all over the California coast. So
Oh, there you go. So you know them well.
but what is making one of them less successful because he's not as big or
It's
in
not
the
necessarily by size, but just somehow there's some sort of competition or choice by the female. Either he's just not as attractive, or he's being outcompeted by the males. It could be.
yeah, he might have better plumage if it was a bird or
Yeah,
something.
exactly. So it's either competition or like or competition in the sense like he's beating up the other males or
Or they're
something.
fighting.
Or it's just he's just more attractive, and that then he's just being able to inseminate so many more. But the fact is, in general, you see that there's a lot more variance in reproductive success for males than females. But there's some exceptions to that. One interesting one, it has to do sometimes with like parental care too. Seahorses are the opposite, because with seahorses, remember the father has to hold the babies.
So they're so fascinating. Years ago, I went to a seahorse museum, and they're just magical. Please don't tell me that they're going extinct like everything else.
I've not heard that. I don't know.
Yeah, no. I'd heard that the male had the baby. Does the male have the baby?
Maybe it's essentially hosts them in a pouch.
So the female has the baby, and then the male
Female,
puts it in a pouch like a
exactly. The female
kangaroo.
basically transfers it into the pouch of the male to keep. Yeah, I know. Isn't that cool?
Interesting
Isn't
thing.
that cool?
Like a kangaroo puts
Yeah,
it in.
kind of. But yeah, except the other way, with the kangaroos, of course, it's the female that has the pouch. But yeah,
Yeah, it's a female. And then what does the female do after she has the baby and gives it
she can go
back?
off and find more mates. So it's kind of a reversal.
Oh, I
The
love
male
that.
stuck guys like, oh, I gotta take care of all these guys.
You
There's a
might
few.
now find women saying to their husbands, "Can't you be more like a seahorse?"
I love it.
Anyway, okay,
Oh,
I will allow you to go to the next
no, that's
topic.
cool. That's cool. But actually, so I want to continue along, just relating it back to the Breen. So with the Breen, there was a little bit different. It wasn't just that there were two forms, but it was almost like there was this gelatinous form that then could be made more solid. The closest thing I could think of, and actually this came up by the way in the Seventh Rule podcast. I saw Carlos Cisco, is one of the writers, was actually speaking to them. He mentioned that the sort of gelatinous becoming solid aspect too. So kudos to him and kudos to that podcast. But the closest thing I could think of like that, and this is one you might know well too, is think of like a soft shell crab, right? So when a crab molts, it's kind of gelatinousy, but then it ends up like using its nutrients to solidify the shell. So maybe what's happening with that Breen head case, it's somehow not allowing nutrients to be used or keeping it at a temperature where it just stays all gelatinous. But if you get rid of the helmet, it just it's
Oh,
solid.
that's a great explanation. So Locke got rid of his helmet and became more solid.
Yeah. Maybe it's temperature control. Like it's not true for soft shell crabs, I don't think, but maybe it's for the Breen. It's just, if you warm up enough, it just solidifies, or maybe it's exposure to air. Who knows?
I could be dreaming, but I thought I heard a line that it had something to do with the love he had for a human, like the love between him and Maul made his face. I could be, that could be a false, like I thought I heard a line about that, but anyway,
Okay.
some
Well,
reason
I don't
different.
know if people are aware that soft shell crab is like, it's just a regular crab, right? It's just a crab, and it's after it molts, it is just kind of soft until it produces a new hardened shell. So it takes it like, I don't know, maybe a week or something like that to solidify out. Just want to make sure people understand it's not like a different kind of crab. It's just a crab that has molted. That's all that is.
No, it's a crab that, yeah, it's a crab that would be completely an analogy to the bream.
Yeah, that's my hope.
That would make that crab so vulnerable for
It's
that.
very vulnerable then, yeah, yeah. And I suspect that they often are hiding then when that's happening. They're probably very, very trepidatious.
And they have to do that in order to, because they've grown and they need a bigger shell now. Yeah,
Exactly, exactly. So then the new shell then hardens, and then they're good again, at least as good as they were before.
very
That
cool.
was actually my high school mascot, was the crabber. And our fight song was "You can't crush a crab," which is obviously not true. We say
And
that,
then you shout it out, except when they're molting.
except when they're holding, exactly.
Well, great. That's cool. And then the second thing you were pointing out, what
Yeah,
was the second
the
item from
communications
episode
aspect.
6?
Yeah, so you remember they were doing those whistles to do the long distance communications out in Helmno, which I thought was really cool. Like, oh, fascinating. And one interesting example that I looked up about this, because I heard about it a little bit, but I looked up some more information, is elephant rumbles. So elephants actually, rather than a high pitch, they actually use a super low frequency call. So we can hear like 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. They call out at like 1 to 20 hertz. So it's like super, super low frequency. Um, and what happens with that super low frequency, it's less likely to lose power over long distances. So they can recognize an individual calling sometimes like 2 kilometers away. Like, oh, that's Jayne calling over there.
Where's
Which is
that? Yeah, right. Oh, wow.
amazing. And they can actually hear it much further away than that. But like they, because of that super low frequency, they call it a rumble because it kind of sounds almost like a stomach rumble. But it's super low frequency, but it's one of their modes of communication, which I thought was really cool. What's interesting also, I don't think elephants can hear as high frequency as us. So if you actually did a super high frequency sound, the elephants just didn't even notice it was happening.
I don't hear.
They hear overall lower. I mean, it overlaps us by a lot, but they hear lower. I thought that was,
Isn't that true for whales as well in the ocean? They have songs that go
yeah,
very, very far in
they
the
do.
ocean.
There, it's the difference there is, of course, you're using water vibrations, right, as opposed to like air vibrations. So that allows a different sort of transmission. But yeah, no, that's true. They do go quite a bit far. But then,
I really liked those whistles. That was really pretty.
yeah, yeah, I thought it
Yeah.
was really cool. And then related to just in terms of sound and vibration, was you might remember the thing they were doing to clear out the dust from the lungs of the people there, which
Right.
I thought was really interesting there. When we think about sound vibrations in health, I mean, obviously the thing that sort of a lot of people think of as just an ultrasound for basically just viewing like, organs or a baby or something like that inside the body. The other things which some people might be familiar with is ultrasonic procedures to break up kidney stones. So that's one of the things that's commonly used, is use these super high vibrations, but very localized things. So it can break up a kidney stone that's coming down rather than, having a surgery try to pull out the whole big thing. But there is actually something that's a lot closer. There are these like lung percussion approaches to help clear mucus. So there's a technique, if you just Google like lung percussion or something, like there's a technique where you just do this sorts of taps just right, and it creates this series of vibrations and a sound that actually just helps break up like thick mucus and stuff like that, which is kind of
Well,
neat.
they used to have to do that for really sad, the kids who had cystic fibrosis, you would have to pound
Yeah,
on the lungs, but now there seems to be a cure, which is amazing.
love
So
it.
people don't have to go through that anymore, but there was the constant pounding for exactly that reason. Yeah.
Love it, love it. The closest thing I found, there was actually a device called a lung flute that can help patients with COPD get their music out. Or sorry, get their mucus, not music, get their mucus out. I'm thinking
Yeah.
flute. But it makes those low frequency sound waves when the patients blow into it. So it's not exactly the same, but like there's still some similarities to it. And there's other devices that do the same similar sort of thing, but just something I found from my internet searches. I was like, is there actually a device that does this? But that was the
So
closest.
they would blow into this device,
Yeah.
it would create a sound, but
Yeah.
the sound would go into the lungs and
Yeah. The combination of the sound plus the blowing then was actually really helped clear stuff out. So it was really cool. I'm like, oh, interesting.
oh.
Yeah, I've never used it. I don't really know anything about it, but I just found it on PubMed, the big medical database. But yeah, that was the biology I found. There wasn't a whole lot of emphasis on biology, even though obviously there's a lot of really interesting stuff in there. It's neat seeing another connection to the mirror universe coming back, even if they didn't actually go to the mirror universe. And
I know. There's
yeah,
so much there's so much to do with mirror universe. With sound, people do I've never done one, but people here, because I'm in California, but they probably do them. They do sound baths,
oh
where they go somewhere and somebody, you know, has the sounding bowls and people lie there and it's a healing thing for anxiety or
oh,
you sit there and you listen to these beautiful bowls, like the Buddha bowls. So that's a form of the sound entering your body and
yeah,
calming you down or
yeah.
lifting depression. And really, people have used sound and music and singing. When you think about it, I'm just forming my thought as I talk, but it's a very healing
Oh yeah.
and
Definitely
it's
therapeutic in terms of like
human.
emotions and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, totally, totally. Even just from personal experience, right? Like if you're not feeling great, sometimes you just play a happy song and you feel better.
Yes, yes. And that can only help you physically as well, I'm sure,
Yeah. What's your
but
favorite kind of music? If to ask, that's for that.
yeah, that would. So wait, were you asking what
Yeah.
I got from? Okay, so
No, I said, what's your favorite music?
oh, my favorite music. It's hard. It's hard to pinpoint. My husband and my girls are way better at creating playlists and labeling them by genre and stuff. And I sometimes just pirate their list because it's so good, but it depends on the mood. I do love, I don't like big, loud, bombastic classical music so much. Especially if I'm home, I'm like, whoa, too much. But I do love beautiful piano. Um,
Mm,
and I love female vocalists.
mhm, mhm.
So I do love, I mean, I love people like Joni Mitchell and
Oh yeah.
King and things,
No, she's an amazing
and
voice. Yeah, sure.
Sinead, and I mean any of these female vocalists I love.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, a lot of different. Depends. Some bands,
yeah.
yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I figured
I
since we're
got
talking about it, I figured I'd ask
remind
you.
me. I got to get better at organizing music on my phone and listening to it to calm myself down or something.
That's awesome.
Um,
What are some of the things that you took away from like the production or acting or things like that from these episodes?
Most of the stuff that I take away from this season, it seems, is thematic, and me sensing. Um, I mean, I don't know, but it's sensing almost the journey of the writers, what they're going through, or what they're wrestling with in their own lives, or what they're trying to um, put out into the world in terms of questions. It's always the question. As a scientist,
Mhm.
um, you have to ask the right question. You have to, if you, wasn't it, didn't Einstein say 90% or 99% of the work is coming up with the right question, and then the rest, like if you can pinpoint what your actual question is, then you've kind of gone a long way to
Yeah.
solving it. Does that sound
Sounds like the
familiar?
Woody Allen quote of 90% of success is showing up.
Oh, well, yeah, actually, that's true. Just show up.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a good quote. So
Yeah.
you're quoting Woody Allen, and I'm quoting. Um, but I did in episode 5. This was something that I made a connection in my mind, but we talked earlier about the moment between Tarina and Saru. When Saru did something that his motivation was to protect Tarina.
Mhm.
So he kind of broke up with her, if I'm remembering correctly. And here she is, the president of Navarre, right?
Yep.
Is
Yep.
that,
Good. Yep.
and then they have
He
that
was he was he
interesting.
was postponing the wedding announcement, I think is what it was, or something
But
like
oh, it's postponed. There was some sort of, but he did it to protect her because
that.
somebody had come to him and threatened her. So he came in and without discussing with her what had happened, kind of freaked her out a little bit, like what's up? And then she quite rightly said, but I didn't ask you to do that for me. You know, and he didn't give her an opportunity to weigh in on it. She might have said, "That's great, thanks." But if she should have, but what I thought was a very interesting parallel to Maul's father, Book's mentor, did the same thing to his wife and child. He said, "I'm going to leave them, because they're more protected." So Book gets the relationship of a father. Book gets all of the wisdom and the relationship over years and loves, Booker Cleveland, his mentor. And then what is the devastation left in Saru and Tarina's case? They fixed it right away, and then they mentioned conscious relationship and all that. But in this case, we see how making a decision, I just thought it was an interesting parallel. I don't know if the writers thought of it, but it is something that people do. I did it for their own good, and you wonder, did they even consult with the people who would be the most deeply affected? And we see the effect on Maul, who she becomes, the problem she has. I mean, this is like lifelong devastation, losing her father. So I just wrote a note to myself, there's more to survival than just keeping someone alive physically.
Mhm.
And so there's there was something interesting there. I like the through line theme, and I brought it up in our little hello to the season, to this episode. But the through line of second chances comes up. I mean, Sonequa, obviously. I mean, Burnham. Obviously, the whole show is based on she's given second chance, but there's second chance for Book, and there's going to be a second chance, we hope, for Maul and Locke. This was so that's great.
What did you think of the in terms of the Breen, the sort of the reaction to showing the other face? Like I wrote down one of the quotes here. It says, "You consort with that face. It's an insult to your heritage. This is Breen." And then and then Locke responded, "Then why can we change? Both faces are a part of us. If we deny half our nature, we deny all." It was an interesting sort of
And
cultural aspect.
I think the writers are doing a great job introducing universal questions, which is why I brought this up, because and they definitely have some Jungians on that team, because this is very Jungian to talk about. You cannot you cannot avoid your own shadow, and so that's very good. That's very good. That I did not write that. Thank you for writing that line down,
Oh, I had to
because
play it like 6 times because it's really hard to hear through those things.
oh yeah, yeah, okay, thank you, because I didn't play it 6 times. So
Really
thank you
hard to
for
get
writing
it.
that line down. But that such a great line, how they get into Star Trek, in the Star Trek universe, but in this show, how they're getting into these bigger bigger themes. And then that carries on in episode 6. I thought the genuine 21st century legal pad was hilarious.
That was very funny.
Really, that was funny. But they bring in that grief program for Culber's character. I find Culber's journey, that he's seen something bigger than he can explain through science, and it's really kind of throwing him off. And then that grief program, I mean, how lovely. He
Grandmother.
brings back his abuela, and what they used to cook. And then she says, "Oh, I threw out what we cooked, and I cooked it while you were napping."
The timing for that one was fascinating because there was somebody at work who actually does a lot of sort of AI and learning innovation kinds of things. And she actually made a comment just the other day saying, if only I had a program that could let me have an opportunity to have a conversation with my parents or something like that who passed. Like, oh, we just saw that.
Don't they have that now, don't they? I thought they had some, or maybe I was just reading articles a few years ago about how they were going to create something like that. I mean, it
Well,
was really moving and nice in Star Trek, because we are in that future world. I mean, they're in like the 32nd century.
yeah.
It's a little, it's a little freaky thinking about it in our world. And
Yeah, definitely. It feels a
also,
little disturbing. If my parents are still alive, but like
yeah,
that's
yeah,
still
because
a
it wouldn't
creepy idea.
really.
Talking this AI version of them.
But also AI, everyone's so afraid of AI, and I agree with all the complaints, but I always make a joke that if I just look at the mistakes AI makes on my iPhone when I'm texting that make absolutely no sense, that tell someone I'll meet them in a hippopotamus because I've written, I mean, I'm like, don't have to worry too much about AI getting it right, completely yet. But you just look at your texts and how they try to fill in what you're going to say, and you're like, yeah. They had a nice thing in episode 6 with Tilly, the teacher parent, you know, um, moments, what it is to be a teacher, and
The deer.
that you have to let them go at a certain point. Maybe that's because that's in my life too, but that stuck out to me. Culber's journey, something to something greater, connection to something greater. Even Adira had they just gave her a moment of it, but they gave her a nice moment of the idea that you have to forgive yourself. You have to forgive yourself for your mistakes or what you perceive as your mistake. Um, uh, so, oh yeah, so Adira did that. Uh, a topic of forgiving yourself. Um, Thought that was resolved.
If we jump back to season 5 for a
Oh, yeah.
second, we saw that Oo and Detmer in a very quiet scene. Like there wasn't much elaboration of it, but there was just a quick comment to Michael said to Rayner saying that, oh, they're going to go and take back the Enterprise to Federation HQ or something like that. Which I was like, that's an interesting sort of exit. I wonder if that was, I don't know if that was
Well,
intentional or
you had to tell me that because I missed that because I did write in my notes, where's Detmers? You know, um, I had been writing in my notes, oh, where's the bridge crew? And I actually looked it up online because I missed them. Um, but the only thing I could think was a scheduling conflict,
that makes sense.
um, just like a straightforward scheduling conflict.
Yeah.
And
I
they
think
may
they were
be.
directing something too, so maybe she was doing that.
Yeah, well, some sort of scheduling conflict where they were doing something else. And of course, when they were filming, they wouldn't have known that this was their last season.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't have known, that, that these were some of the last episodes,
Yeah.
so they
Hopefully they
like,
come back at the
oh,
end. We'll see.
yeah, hopefully, yeah. We'll see, won't we?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. I hope so. Um, Yeah, there seems to be this whole question. I can't remember. I didn't write down what character said, "Are there no gods?" Oh, it was the father of the young
Oh,
girl
on
that
Helen No.
sacrificed the girl.
Yeah.
But there seems to be this science versus God, or this whole question is coming in this whole season. Um, I find it a kind of false dichotomy because I
Yep.
find them two different areas,
Yep. Same.
so I find that a false duality, a false dichotomy. I don't understand the problem with
Agreed.
both.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I wrote down Culber. Things are. I love that they had a line when Culber was talking to Book, um, and Culber said he was having a spiritual awakening of some sort. I would and then book says something about things are less meaningful if we're doing them just for ourselves. And I thought, I'm sort of catching all these themes.
Yeah.
Um, but overall, as an actor watching the show, I do have to just do another shout out. I do it every time we talk, but
Well
there's just
deserved.
such good acting. I mean, I love, Sonequa. I always talk about her authenticity. I love Anthony Rapp's humor. David Ajala is just so good. Yeah, and Rayner, Callum, all these, you know, actors are doing a really good job. So,
I completely agree. I completely
hats off
see.
to them, and hats off to when they have a difficult moment let's not forget the director who, actors dream of having a director. They bring this stuff with them, but they always dream of having a director who can do something that helps them um, form performance a little bit more exactly. So, I can't say what happened on the set, but
Do you have an experience like that? Do you want to relate like something where like there's a director who really helped you in a particularly challenging scene or something like that, where you're like, oh, Jonathan Frakes or whoever
well,
picked them randomly, somebody like really helped on something.
I have two
It's like,
opposite things to say about that.
okay.
The thing that contradicts what I just said is that when I was in drama school and they're teaching the actors technique, the teacher would say, "You're going to be lucky if you encounter." I mean, this was from the actor's point of view. I'm married to a director. I just directed something, so there are great, amazing directors, but often directors can be scared of actors or not understand actors, just not understand it at all. And but this teacher said to us, "You've got to know what you're doing because you're going to run into one, maybe two great directors in your lifetime." And
Oh,
meaning you got to come prepared because they're not going to tell you what to do. On the other hand, um, a really good director. I have more stories. For some reason, I can't. I think a great director sometimes can be great by leaving the actor alone,
yeah, it's fair.
by
Sure.
not interfering, by allowing them to giving them the space and the time to do what they want to do. But my husband, who directs a lot, brings home great stories of how to help, like a young actor. This comes to mind. I might have even said this once. But a young actor once, very young actor, who didn't have a lot of experience, had to talk about the fact that his mother, something about his mother had died, perhaps, something very sad. And the young actor was very tense and couldn't quite, you know, um, bring that reality into the moment. And John just went up beforehand and very quietly said, "I'm just wondering, did your character find your mother?" It's
Hmm.
like gave the actor a picture
Hmm.
of something, and because he allowed the actor to think of something other than his own performance and gave the actor something to imagine, the young actor was able to do that. And I have had that experience where a coach uh, will give me an image and then I go, "I'm good. That's great.
That's
Just
awesome.
give me that image and now I'm there,
I love that. Well, one last question for you, since you mentioned it in passing, but like, yeah, like you just said a
Oh,
couple words on. You mentioned that you just finished directing something. Do you want to say a little bit about what that
oh.
is, where that is?
Yeah, God, this has been a long journey, but for years people have said to me, "Oh, you seem like a writer, you seem like a producer, you should be writing, you should be directing, whatever." And I'd be like, "Oh, I'm busy." Um, but a couple years ago, I thought, "Oh, okay, I'll do it." And somebody said to me, "You need to direct a short film." But, they always say fools go where wise men fear to tread. Like I had no idea what I was in for. So I was like, "Oh, I'll write a short film. How hard can it be?" It's hard, really hard. And then I was like, "Oh, I'll produce it." It's just so hard to do it, but I have completed it and I will let people know. I did put out some news. I haven't done it in like a month, but on my Instagram at the Jayne Brook. Apparently, there's a couple of false Instagrams, but I'm the Jayne Brook. But anyway, I did put some pictures from the short and some shout outs to the cast. And then when the festival season starts for me, I'll put out there where it's showing. And if anybody is in the area of a festival where it's showing, you can come over and say hi.
What's the
And
name?
see, it's called Flipside.
Flipside.
It's not science fiction. It's more, but yeah.
I love that. I love that.
If you look at Instagram or Twitter, X, which used to be called Twitter,
Yeah.
uh, formerly known, uh, I don't know why they
Social
bother
media.
to do that.
I don't
Formerly
know.
known,
Social media, formerly known as Twitter.
I know it's like such a long name. Um, so yeah, I wrote, produced, and directed that.
That's outstanding. That's
I didn't
outstanding.
cast myself. That was enough.
Yeah, you had enough roles as both producer
Yeah.
and director. It's fair.
Yeah.
Well, thank
So
you as always for a wonderful chat. Always love chatting with you about this and enjoyed talking about the biology and production in season 5, episodes 5 and 6 of Star Trek Discovery, the final
thank
season.
you.
All right.
Great to see you always.
Thanks
And
for
now
watching, everybody.
left-handed. My
Oh,
left-handed. I'm left-handed.
yeah. Have a
Okay,
good
bye, everybody.
one.
Thank
Bye.
you.